So, starting now. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you are doing well today. I am Shakya Agrawal from the Cyberblog India, and I will be your host for the evening. This is going to be our seventh Instagram live as our run up to our 2022 conference titled Abuse and Harassment in Cyberspace Beyond the Perceived Notion of Mainstream. So, for the people who are joining us for the first time, I'm just going to give a brief of what this conference is all about. So the conference seeks to initiate a discussion on the threats that is faced by the LGBTQI plus community members on the internet. And it also brings out to facilitate sharing of niche stories and first-hand experiences of community members. And it also seeks to raise awareness about the challenges faced by the community while dealing with cybercrime incidents. You can know more about the conference through our Instagram channels. You can drop us a text on the helpline, wherever, and you can find the helpline details on our channel. So, for today's session, we have Manak. Manak describes himself as a feminist, queer activist, and development professional working to develop right-based youth leadership to advance gender justice and sexuality rights. He is an executive director of the YP Foundation that empowers young people in accessing information and enhancing their ability to use it to ensure that their rights and the rights of others are protected. Thank you so much, Manak, for accepting our invitation and being part of the conference.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I think this is a very important topic that you all have picked to highlight in this conference, and I'm glad it's being taken up. Now is the time to do that.
Thank you so much. I request you to add something if I've missed anything or you would like the audience to know about yourself.
Sure, nothing much to add. Like Pragya said, I am based in Delhi. I have been working within and learning from the women's rights and the queer rights movements, the feminist movements in India. And a lot of my work has been on developing young people's leadership on issues of gender, sexuality, including a focus on diversity and inclusion as well. And so that is a lot of my work. I'm not a legal expert. So many of the issues around, what are laws, what are policies around harassment, I don't have legal knowledge. So I want to give that right at the start. What I do have is, my own experience as well as insight from having spoken to, worked with many young people who are dealing with these kinds of issues and being part of the diverse queer community in India, which has dealt with coming onto the internet slowly and with great, fear as well as excitement. So that's what I bring to this conversation.
That's great. Thank you so much. So let's start. Okay. So my first question being, how was your journey on the internet? Like, how did it start? How is it right now?
So that's I'll have to reveal my age and say my journey on the internet started with the dial-up modems, which made this great noise when you started connecting. And we all had moments where we are trying to download various things and half the image is there and half is still stuck somewhere on the internet and we don't know what the hell to do after that. So that was the beginning of my time on the internet. I was a generation which was in school, I think, when internet in India became a thing. And since then, now, I think it's sometimes you forget how much struggle getting onto the internet and having a device that made you internet connected was. Also being queer myself, I have also seen that kind of, the underbelly slash the safe and hidden spaces of the internet, where many queer people found themselves, found other queer people, and try to understand beyond this, feeling of this is only me who is different and who's like this.
Right.
I think that is also integrally part of my own, navigation of the internet, finding out about who I am, what I feel, how to navigate this world. A lot of that for me started with the internet because there was no other space that was talking about it. And I don't think that has changed significantly, unfortunately, in India right now.
Right. So do you think that as compared to when the dial-up was there and now there is a greater accessibility on the internet for the queer community to, just find their people, find themselves?
Yeah, I think there is definitely greater access. There are many more platforms where people can find communities that they identify with, that they feel that they are part of. It is much easier to find information, although much more difficult now to sift through what is correct information and what might be misleading information. So I
Right.
think that has come together with this explosion of the internet and information that is being thrown at all of us. Earlier, you had to make a huge amount of effort to get that dial-up modem, to have a personal device and sit somewhere, either in a cyber cafe, or if you were fortunate enough to have your own computer at home, sit on that and really pray that your connection will be stable and you'd be able to
Yeah.
surf the internet and get some information. Now there is constant information being thrown at us via WhatsApp and websites. So I think the
Right.
issues around how to navigate the internet have changed, but there is definitely much greater access, much greater ease in finding other people and finding communities that give you some kind of information about the world.
Right. For sure, there are many benefits of the internet because accessibility is great, I believe. But on the negative side of the internet stands hate comments that people face when they are expressing themselves, just existing, right? So,
Right.
have you dealt with such hate comments personally, or do you know anybody who has dealt with them, and how do people actually go around resolving these?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. And I think the time when I was personally myself navigating the internet as my own safe space, it was much easier. I think there was less hating on other people around on the internet, perhaps at least in my experience. And now, as I go back to the internet as a place of work, which it is also for many of us who are working on social media, who are trying to connect with young people and communities of queer people on the internet, I think anonymity that comes with the internet, the ease with which you
Right.
can be anonymous, also gives you a lot of impunity.
Hmm.
Where and I think it functions at two levels. One is this organized thought that I can actually go hate on people, say anything, and nobody will do anything to me because nobody can reach me. And the
Right.
other is, I think that this inherent thing, right? Like I think people's privileges have translated to how privileged they are on the internet. So
Hmm.
men
Right.
particularly kind of trolling that the it's also skewed, right? The kind of trolling that we see really escalating is always against people who are marginalized or vulnerable on some count or the other. Women face a lot more of it. Queer people face a lot more of it. Religious minorities, oppressed castes, all of these communities, wherever in the world, and not
Right.
just talking about India, right?
Hmm.
Anywhere in the world, people who are more vulnerable face much more of this kind of trolling because there is that much less ability to you don't have that privilege to be able to stand
Right.
up for it.
Hmm.
And that's, I think, a big problem that and I see this continuously on there are a lot of these influencers who are it's public
Right.
and on the internet. So an influencer who is not the kind of body that will be most accepted or appreciated if you
Hmm.
are quote unquote, you're fat or you're different
Right.
looking in any way,
Hmm.
you would face much more of this trolling. And it's there on influencer accounts, which is what is also amazing, right? Like people who have followers, 10,000, 500,000 followers, still continue to face this kind of hate just for being,
Right.
who they are. And that's, people don't think this kind of anonymity. I don't have to think now before putting something out there. It gives you a
Exactly.
certain
Hmm.
distance where you don't engage with somebody face to face, and therefore you don't consider them human. So you can say anything. I think that's the problem with this kind of digital internet space, which is very disconnected from the real world for many people who are accessing it from like a dark room of their own.
Hmm. Right. I believe that that's especially what gives this people a sort of power. I believe that they can get away with it, but they can't. They can't actually. That is where the lack of awareness is there. That you can
Mhm.
actually do something about it, but people
Mhm.
don't know that, and that is why it harms them. So
Mhm.
have you
Absolutely.
had?
I think people who are, yeah, no, sorry, finish your question.
Uh, do you know how people deal with the hate comments that they usually get? If you know any instances.
I think most people who I have spoken to, whether it's professional accounts, pages who are talking about, say, sexuality issues or rights, or it is individual people, right, have all reached a point where now everybody feels that engaging with trolls and engaging with hate comment is just a waste of time. It's not going to get you
Right.
anywhere. So a lot of people then just choose to block and move on. I know some people, I mean, there are these huge famous accounts that I follow also, somebody called Alok Vedmanan, who
Right.
sends back these wonderful, deep messages to people who are trolling them. But I don't know whether it gets through to somebody who's giving that much hate. I know a lot of others, particularly women, who have just had no other option or recourse but to say, I'm not going to engage with this. There are
Right.
yet others who then say something hilariously funny or just, keep on having that kind of random banter with somebody who's trolling them. And then that kind of screenshot becomes very, very viral, etc. But,
Hmm.
and I think we have those momentary kind of victories where somebody who's given a very politically correct or liberal or a nice punchline wala response will become famous for that one day. But in the long term, I think it wears people down. It wears people who
Right.
are trying to do good work or trying to just be themselves online. It wears
Hmm.
you down to feel and be directed, be the recipient of this kind of hate, and that I feel is unfortunate because while we've been working on ground on making school systems, workplaces all safer and inclusive, the internet being inclusive still seems like many people are more working about it, working around it, working to do this, but it's just such a vast space that
Hmm.
you need more and more and more work in this area.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. While you're on one hand, you're trying to move forward and forward and forward, and then these trolls come back, and you have to take a step back because you don't know what to do. So, what advice do you have for the young queer people and just queer people in general as to how to deal with unsolicited DMs or hate comments or anything else that is not appropriate?
Mhm. I think there's a couple of things actually when you're navigating the internet and getting either hate comments or threats to your privacy. Right? There are all those kinds of things that happen. So hate comments is one part of it. Hate comments are often
Yes.
public. You can get them in your inbox on Instagram and you can put it in the other inbox and forget about it, not deal with it, etc. The other is this other phenomenon of having your privacy violated, having your
Right.
pictures taken off your own account and being circulated in a widely different context. That is
Hmm.
happening to women, that is happening to queer people. We saw a situation in Bangladesh a few years ago where personal information about queer rights activists was being put up online with a very
Okay.
directed message to go and actually kill them, go murder them, be violent towards them. And it took a long time, and it took many of us who knew somebody who worked at Facebook, who knew somebody who worked in Instagram, to really
Right.
raise alarm and say this is dangerous and this needs to be addressed. So I
Hmm.
think one to people who are facing this kind of comment, I think all of us, including me, I don't face these kinds of comments. I come with a lot of privilege of caste, class, gender, and all of that, and education, of the privilege of understanding how privacy and being intuitively tuned into how technology works. Right, all of
Right.
these are privileges in the internet age. And I don't face hate comments also because my account is not big enough to face any hate comments. So I don't face this, but I think for people who face, we all need to increase our own understanding of what the laws are that
Hmm.
protect us. Right,
Right.
that is one part of what we can do. I think the other thing which makes it difficult to access these laws is that if I am gender non-conforming, if I am queer, if I am Dalit, hi,
Hi. Hi. I apologize for the internet connection. It's
no
still
worries.
in the dial-up. I'm guessing.
Not much has changed since the dial-up time, it seems.
No, not really. So, the last I was able to hear you was when you were talking about how there's a privilege on the internet and how there needs to be some sort of awareness even in the legal system regarding DMs and comments.
Yeah, no, what I was saying is, and I think I continued on the live after you got disconnected. So I had shifted to talking about the conference itself, and it'll be good to give everybody information about when the conference would be. But I was saying that one part of it is the DMs, etc., that you get, or the hate that you get, and that can be ignored to an
Right.
extent. The other part of it is the real violence that sometimes putting up your personal information, circulating your, so-called, what is, there was a term for it which I've forgotten, but basically your pictures, like circulating
Hmm.
anybody's picture, that's that kind of a thing, that kind of a threat. And I think being vulnerable on any of these counts, being queer, being a woman, makes
Right.
it that much more difficult to be able to
Hmm.
seek help, because you don't just have to contend with a very unwieldy legal system, but you also have to
Right.
contend with a very unforgiving moral system
Hmm.
that
I
blocks
agree.
your access to seek support in case something
Right.
happens. Why were you on the internet? Why are you making these reels? Good girls
Hmm.
don't do these kinds of things. It's your fault if you put something on the internet. Obviously, it will get circulated.
The victim
All of
blaming
these
that
things.
goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a big part of why people are not able to really. That's the other part that people are not able to deal with. The hate
Hmm.
comments, etc. Fine, you can ignore them and move on.
Right. Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's a lot of intersectionality that goes on even between the real world and the online world that is present. So, moving on to a more corporate setting, do you think that the corporate sector has become more inclusive over the years, or it has changed in a better sense of way? And how can we change it to become more welcoming? How can it be amended?
Mhm. Again, my rider here is I've never worked in the corporate sector. I have friends who work in the corporate sector and others. I do some training based engagement with the corporate sector, particularly in their diversity and inclusion streams
Right.
sometimes. And I think so. If I think about the corporate sector, right, in India, one big established companies, big established global companies now have policies. They have
Right.
policies and systems to check discrimination, which exists globally, and they keep trying to enforce them in India. But in
Right.
India, where the entire staff is Indian, you still have to contend with Indian people's moralities and biases,
Right.
right?
Right.
All
Hmm.
people's moralities and biases everywhere. Why just India? In every country, right?
Right.
So there might be a policy, but if I know that my boss and the three other supervisors in my system are not going to be receptive to this idea, I will still sit very quietly and try to be out of everybody's attention.
Right.
And I think while I think things have definitely improved and changed, corporates are making much more of an effort to publicize that they value diversity.
Hmm.
I think hard non-discrimination policies, clauses in contracts, systems like bathrooms or use of photos, etc.,
Right.
action against bullying are still not in policies many times. They are just on
Hmm.
the whims of the supervisor. And I think it is important to make corporate systems accountable to having those policies and binding rules in place.
Right.
The other part of the corporate world is now the startup culture, right? Where
Yeah.
there are small teams, overworked people. When you say startup, there is a certain kind of seedy sort of rude bro image that immediately springs to
Yeah.
mind. I think queer to chhodi do, matlab udhar women have such a bad time, or seemingly so in startups is what I hear, right? And also women don't have a bad time because they can't cope up with that kind of culture, or people can cope
Hmm.
with that kind of culture of I understand that work is stressful, there is a lot of work, there is no sense of work life balance, all of that is there because you're trying to get this
Right.
important thing off the ground. But what happens when you have a small team and a small setup is that you don't have time, or sometimes even the money and the bandwidth to pay attention to diversity, right? You don't
Hmm.
have the time, the money, the bandwidth to bring in policies in place.
Right.
uh, Organizations of a certain size perhaps don't require an internal complaints committee to be in place entirely.
10
If you
members
hire
of 10.
consultants, then you don't have to provide them certain benefits. And so
Hmm.
I think that's the other part of the corporate world where there are many systems, checks and there are many systems to avoid accountability.
Right.
Interestingly, those are allowed more and more to corporates than to say government entities, non-government charitable organizations.
Hmm.
Corporates can by their registration systems be less accountable. And I think that's a
Interesting.
larger problem than an individual organization's policy.
Hmm. Yeah, I did not know that a lot because yeah, accountability, I guess something is very important in everywhere actually. And yeah, I think those are great points to have there in the corporate sector's policy that okay, you know what, if you're not doing that, you're held accountable because a lot of times it just goes by and nobody does anything. So what is the point of a policy if you're not going to implement it anywhere, if it's not actually working towards what you're going for?
Yeah, and I don't want to make this one-sided, right? Like many corporates are also leading the charge and giving, say, 6-month parental leaves, right? Because they are big companies and they can afford it. There are both sides of that. Big companies are exploitative, but big companies can also afford to do these public things of saying we are going to give a 6-month paternal leave or a parental leave, even though there might be a culture in that company of discouraging men particularly from taking such leave, right? So those are also systems that exist, and so I don't want to say corporates are all bad. Many corporates are doing stuff that I as an NGO person don't have the ability or the bandwidth to be able to do.
Hmm.
And there are good organizations and bad organizations of all kinds, but I think that since the focus of the corporate sector and the corporate registration and the purpose of the company is to maximize profit, not to
Right.
maximize inclusion, right? That is why perhaps more checks are required in that kind of a setup, because when you're only chasing profits, it's that much easier for you by design to lose sight of taking the people who are earning you those profits along.
Right. That's the bipolarity of the corporate world. It's good, it's bad, it's everything. Just like the internet, just like everything. So, as a closeted person, how did you think that one would feel seeing all the cases of abuse and cyber harassment on the news, social media, or anywhere around you? Like,
Um, So I think I do think it's very hard for people who are, who are not able to be public about their sexuality and their gender.
right.
Uh, and I think that particularly, as all spaces close in on you together at a certain age. At a certain
Hmm.
age, when you're, say, in your late 20s or early 30s, there is so much more marriage pressure from your family. There is so much more, and this marriage pressure is not just family, right? Everybody at work is asking you, why aren't you married? If my colleague can wear her, big chuda and or he can put his honeymoon photos on his desk, but God forbid I put
Right.
a photo of my boyfriend and say this is my boyfriend on my desk in the workplace. And so I think it's two things when we are looking at people who are closeted and in many of these spaces. There is
Hmm.
that much more stress of trying to stay undercover. There is
Right.
that much more. So there is a stressful work environment or a stressful family environment or whatever else is going on. Add 50% in just being me and having to
Hmm.
hide who I am constantly as a pressure on my head. Imagine that pressure for somebody who's gay or lesbian, but still is conforming to what a man is supposed to look like or a woman is supposed to look like. That
Right.
much more pressure if you don't fundamentally identify with what you're supposed to look like according to people, right? So I think the more you go away from what is supposed to be a conforming good person in any
Hmm.
of these very traditional setups, that much more pressure on you, that much more automatic daily stress on you to just go about your business in your life, to take the
Right.
metro, to take the bus, to be in a classroom. And I think that is something that we don't recognize, particularly for young people who are in education institutions who face bullying, particularly for trans people who going to a doctor for a fever.
Hmm.
We keep thinking that only stigmatized medical services are sexual health services, but going to a doctor for a fever is very, very hard if you look, quote unquote, like a man but are wearing a sari. And
Right.
I think that for people who are not out, that kind of daily stress is a big part of their lives constantly, and we don't give enough cognizance to that. Relieve that daily stress and see where those people can be in terms of realizing their full potential at the workplace, in education, in any other space, right?
Right.
And that's what I think keeps us back as a society, to not allow people to realize and be their full potential, because we stress them out by just creating these oppressive systems of what you're supposed to conform to.
Right, right. I agree. Like, if half of your energy is going there, half of your energy is going on thinking every day, every second that, you know what? No, because of this reasons. And I think that the cases of abuse, do you think that they also contribute in certain ways? That if you're seeing a case of abuse against the community itself, that sort of pushes you back again into that box that you have allotted to the traditional mindset.
Mhm. It is that kind of circular, difficult position to be in. I think if you're not out, I think if I was, for example, on a dating app, I met somebody and I was harassed by that person, if I was bullied or somebody wanted to just take my money, as somebody who doesn't have this pressure of keeping my identity secret, it is that much more easy for me to go and access police. But for somebody
Hmm.
who is just not would be giving, there are cases where people have just emptied their bank accounts just so
Right.
that their identity is not revealed, because they don't have the wherewithal to go and file a case in the
Yes.
police, right? And I think cases of abuse and bullying, as well as this kind of harassment, whether it is sexual harassment or gendered harassment, whether it is mugging and robbing somebody at gunpoint, all of being closeted makes you that much more vulnerable to these things,
Right.
and you can't do. It's a very difficult position to be in. Even for somebody who's not closeted, following through on a case, dealing with the police, for example, is that much more
Right.
difficult. And if you're in the closet, then, and if you're not public about who you are, if you have to hide your, certain aspects of your life, then that becomes very, very challenging, and that's a big problem. So I think it is definitely, it contributes not just to stress, but to physical violence, to
Hmm.
actual lack of access to resources.
Right.
I think it contributes to all of those things, and that's really why we need a system that brings in education about diversity, sexuality education, to
Hmm.
actually make these things so much more easy to talk about than they are right now.
Right. I think that is what is one of the parts that we are trying to achieve with the conference. That, what are the solutions to this? That people should know that these solutions are there for the closeted people as for the people who are in terms with their sexuality. Uh, this is where actually we are going. Okay, you know what is the recourse to this, and people should know. So that is the awareness that is there. We are trying to prove that. So another question is regarding cross-dressing and how it has become a part of comedy and media and television industry in the country. So how do you feel that, and with like all of that, impacts person who's in the process of exploring their identity in the spectrum?
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. I again have no first-hand knowledge about this and experience about this, and I'm a lot of what I might say is conjecture or coming from conversations with other people.
Right.
Uh, and there are various degrees and nuances to this, right? There is cross-dressing, or there is drag, which is done as performance, which is done
Hmm.
as a political statement, which is done for many purposes, or for
Right.
entertainment on TV shows or wherever else. Uh, and then there is, not cross-dressing, but dressing based on who you think you are and how you think you want to, how you want to express yourself, and what fits for you. And that might not necessarily be cross-dressing; it's just dressing, right? Who is
Yeah.
to
No.
say
No.
what is cross-dressing? Yeah, no, and I totally know what you mean. Like there is,
Yeah.
and they both exist, and it
Hmm.
is this kind
For
of
sure.
comedy aspect of cross-dressing, putting somebody in what is considered not their gender clothing, that is
Hmm.
taken off by Bollywood, taken off by many of these kind of insensitive entertainment platforms, and put up as not uh, good comedy, not even good slapstick comedy, but as
Right.
something to be laughed at just because what it is, right?
Hmm.
And that, I think, is the nuance that we also need to talk about when we're talking about entertainment, dressing, and identities. That people often ask, is any cross dressing or any kind of breaking of gender stereotypes bad in terms of entertainment. It's not. And it's very easy actually to figure out, what is done sensitively and what is not done sensitively. What is
Right.
done as a way of entry point into, an identity and experience, and what is done just to poke fun at something, right? And it's not even someone, it's something, because you don't accord it that kind of human status. And I think I also don't want to say, so for many years we were asked this question of, why all gay people, all gay men are shown as effeminate, and that is poked fun at and laughed at in films. And
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think, yes, that is a problem, but there are effeminate men. And so why should they not find representation in mainstream media as well for who they are without being poked fun at? So
Right.
there should be all that kind of diverse representation of diverse kinds of behavior, identities, expressions in media. And the answer to that, and it's contentious, right? You want some kind of media guidelines. You don't want media guidelines that will eventually be used against you to
Right.
push down diverse representations in the media. So it's a tricky thing, and I don't have an answer to it. What is the best media guideline that holds media accountable to creating violence and insensitivity and hate, but also
Right.
doesn't call for blanket banning of things just because somebody considers that not good enough to be on media, right? So we have
Yeah.
to toe that line, and that's the problem, right? Like for this emotive appeal of ban something that is culturally insensitive. If you make a nuanced progressive argument, your emotional appeal gets lost in the nuance. And so I'm only left with, oh God, all representation of queer people in this manner is bad. That is the
Right.
single point thing. Unfortunately, people will understand, and that's not what I want to say. I want to say there should be diverse representation. That everything needs to be assessed, and I think the answer to that is, of course, in having some kind of regulation and guidelines for the media, but also expanding media education for everybody, so that everybody is
Okay.
able to filter out what is good media, what is good entertainment, and what is bad entertainment on very objective terms. And I think that
Right.
is the other that answer.
Yeah, coming from that, the OTT platforms have started coming up with a lot of queer content through series or movies. So, do you think that it could be changed because with the coming of the big faces, and what changes can be still made to make it more queer inclusive than it already? Do you think that it's good, the OTT platform movies and
Um, I definitely think practices like for big OTT platforms, right? What would I imagine can be done to prioritize certain kinds of shows, to prioritize or make sure that there is diverse representation of characters, people, etc. In the show, in the whole range of shows that are there. I'm not saying every show needs a queer character, but
right?
overall, in the 100 shows that you are showing, what is the kind of representation that these 100 shows together add up to? Right, that's
Right.
the question to think about for all these OTT platforms. I think people will watch what they want to watch. I think we can only hope for diverse enough content to be available for those who want to find it and who want to watch it. So I don't care or don't expect an OTT platform to go out and build people's perspective. My only expectation is that if a young queer person is growing up with access to an OTT platform, somewhere on that platform they should be able to find themselves represented. I think that's the
Right.
only expectation that I would place, that I should be able to find myself in the huge range of content that you are putting online. Somewhere there should be at least one representation of me, right? And I should be able to find it. That should reassure me that I'm okay in being who I
Right.
am. And if my current setup is not accepting of it, then it's not my fault, right?
Right.
I think and I'm not saying they have to do messaging for this. All these messages I will get out on my own. If I'm a young person who's scared and watching an OTT show, I will take out this information and this messages from what I see. All I want to see is one regular life of a queer person, whoever, like nothing sensationalized, not, oh,
Right.
look at this, weird or strange thing. Just a regular life of somebody who's like me on the platform. I think that's the only expectation I would have from them. And the other expectation would be something that actively calls for hate, actively calls for violence. Don't side with that. Put that as something that needs to be reflected on, showed, thought about, but don't side with that. Don't put that as content that needs to be watched or that needs to be, pushed to people.
Right. I think that's very important to have just, a normal setting. Like if you're going for a heteronormative person's perspective, they have so many movies, just normal movies. But I believe that there is certain lack of movies regarding queer people that they're still lacking regarding that. I think that's really important. It's a very different perspective that has come up with all the lives that I've had till date. So, do you think that the current series or movies that are coming out, they are helping in any sort of way to maybe make people more aware or make them more inclusive in any sort of way?
Mm-hmm. I definitely think so. I think it is good that finally, say, mainstream Bollywood is taking up queer themes in whatever plodding, shaky way it is taking them up. So I know I'll get trolled for this later by people who I know, but I don't have so much of a problem with I know that when both these films Chandigarh Ka Aashiki came out, then Badhai Do came out, a lot of people had issues with the films. I watched the films and I thought they were fine. I mean, I didn't think it was some great shining example of wonderful cinema, but it was good. I felt that it was good that these films came out. It's good. Of course, that issue of who is representing a trans character, right?
Right.
And it's again this circular problem. There are not enough trans actors, and therefore we don't take trans actors in trans roles. And because there are not enough trans roles, there are not enough trans actors. It's this circle that goes round and
Right.
round, and somebody has to break the circle and say, I will make an effort to actually find that actor because actors exist. It's not like you have to go
Right.
and create them. They are there.
Yes.
But I do think that I didn't have a major. I think it's good that mainstream Bollywood is taking up these kinds of themes and issues. I think it's great that Netflix is a mainstream thing where people can watch all kinds of content. I think it's great that Alt Balaji puts queer themes into their own shows and it's available to the kind of
Right.
audience that is otherwise perhaps watching Netflix. I mean, I would be thrilled to bits to see a K serial with a queer theme, which is just absolutely mainstream with all the problems of the mainstream K serials of the opulence and the cast and the whatever else. But like there are these two gay characters who are, lesbian women, trans people who are just thrown in there
Yeah.
literally as characters. It would be fantastic, right? So
Yeah.
I'm of the view that if we have to push for matrimonial sites to start including trans profiles in matrimonials, that's a lobbying we should do. Whatever we might think about marriage, whatever I might think about marriage,
Right.
the right to be in all these platforms is absolutely there. And I think it's good that mainstream cinema is now expanding. I think as a country, we don't pay enough attention to regional cinema, where really
Right.
a whole range of issues and identities are now getting represented, which I think we should all individually as well as collectively try and make an effort to highlight and foreground more.
Right. I think that's a great observation. So just a last question. What are the issues that majorly are not discussed enough in the queer community, and what should be discussed more? What should be brought to the mainstream? So just a brief as to some
Yeah, I
points.
think so. How does it, in my experience, right? I think that a lot of conversation in the queer community, a lot of mainstream conversation in the queer community is tiered and geared to respond to gay men, then to perhaps cisgender women, and then to trans persons, and then to persons with disabilities, and then to persons from oppressed castes or from regional or religious minorities,
Right.
or not what is considered the mainstream North Indian Indian
Yes.
identity, unfortunately, in our country, right? And I think that same problem exists within the queer community. That there is not one movement; there are many different movements. They have
Yes.
many different issues, and I think this intersectionality is now getting talked about a lot. But I think it deserves more work. So we can talk about it, but it deserves more work in how all of us do this, right? It
Yes.
deserves more work in by me to say, okay, if I'm on a panel, who else is on this panel? Are they representing a range of diverse entities and experiences?
Right.
And if they're not, then I wouldn't want to be on that panel. It is my responsibility to say I am not the one single sole representative of the queer movement. I have a very privileged experience of being queer in this country because of my various axes of identities, and there are many others who have
Right.
issues that I have not dealt with or are not experienced that need to also be highlighted, right? So I think it's a responsibility on all of us to continuously be conscious of our privilege and to eventually shut up and listen to those whose experiences are more diverse and are much less heard. So I think that's what we do within the queer movement as well. We have for years expected other movements to think and listen and talk about queer issues. I think within the queer movement, we need to do equal amount of rallying to talk about all of these other issues.
Right, that's beautiful. I think that's much needed because there is a lot of diversity within the queer community itself that the queer community does not know about. So I believe that that is something that should be talked about. That's great. For today, I think Manak, that is all I have. I am so grateful to have talked to you today, and this was such a fun conversation. I hope you had fun too. I hope
Thank
the
you. It's
audience
been
knows
great.
much more.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation. It was good to get the chance to sort of think all of these things through for myself as well. And I look forward to all of the sessions in the conference that talk about, internet access and the law. I mean, that's the other thing we need to start talking about now because we don't know what we're dealing with. And it's great that this conference is bringing that up in a big way. So thank you for that and have a good day.
Okay, thank you so much. For your first question, that was when the conference is going to happen. So, audience, the conference is on 23rd and 24th April. We'll be going live on YouTube, Instagram, as much platforms as we can with the two panels on each day. So one panel on each day, and that is how the conference is going to go. I hope that all of you are there. Manak will be there. All of our panelists, the 6 previous panelists, and more will be there. So thank you so much, Manak, for coming in and accepting our invitation. And so glad to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Pragya. Thanks for having me and good luck with the conference.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.